Good evening. Welcome to St. John's Church as we celebrate the annual Red Mass. I am Josh Frichet, Dean of the Creighton University School of Law. We welcome all who are joining us online, members of the Creighton University School of Law, friends, family members, and all members of the legal community. Our presider for this celebration is the 25th president of Creighton University, Father Daniel S. Hendrickson of the Society of Jesus. Our homilist is current holder of the Anna and Donald Waite Endowed Chair in Jesuit Education, Father Kevin Flannery. The celebration of the Red Mass dates to the 13th century when judges and doctors of law wore scarlet robes. Then, as now, the color red symbolized the fire of the Holy Spirit. Let us call upon the Holy Spirit to be present with us today and to bless us with wisdom, understanding, bright judgment, and courage in our daily work. I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize and remember two trailblazers, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Judge Lori Smithcamp, who have both recently passed away. Without these women, our judicial system would not be where it is today. Their commitment to the rule of law and to justice has impacted our community and will continue to reverberate for generations to come. In silence, let us prepare to enter into our celebration. And as a church, let us stand and pray.
Before considering the scriptural readings that have been proposed to us for this Eucharist, this celebration of the annual Red Mass, it would be good to say something about the Red Mass itself, its history and its meaning. The earliest known celebration of the Red Mass occurred in Paris during the reign of Louis IX, recognized now by the Church as Saint Louis, Saint Louis. Edward Teetable, the scholar perhaps most cited in connection with the history of the Red Mass, gives as the date of its first occasion 1245. It is just a coincidence, but certainly interesting, that this is the very year that Thomas Aquinas first arrived in Paris in order to begin his novitiate as a Dominican friar. Thomas, of course, would subsequently become a prominent scholar in Paris during what is known now as his Second Parisian Regency, that is 1269 to 72. He composed that part of his Summa Theologica in which he considers human law, that is both positive law and the natural law, in relation to the eternal law, which he identifies with God himself. The reason why the Red Mass is called the Red Mass has to do, obviously, with the vestments that the main celebrants of the Mass wear. But the reason why red vestments are worn on this occasion has to do with this relationship examined by Thomas between the human race and God, that is the eternal law. The Church specifies red as the liturgical color, not only when she celebrates the memory of her various martyrs, but also when she celebrates masses of the Holy Spirit, including, and in fact especially, the Feast of Pentecost. The color red recalls the tongues of fire that on that occasion, Pentecost, came down upon the disciples of Christ after his ascension into heaven. Christ's ascension was, in a sense, his leaving the human race to its own devices, leaving it, that is, in the nature in which it was created, with both intellect and free will. Pentecost, on the other hand, was God's establishing of a new connection through the church between himself and the human race. This connection is especially important for those engaged in the legal profession, for their free acts shape and in some cases actually define the free acts of the citizens of the polities in which they practice that profession. Our first reading is taken from the first book of Kings and has to do with the early days of the reign of King Solomon, the son of King David. The Lord appears to Solomon in a dream and says to him, "Ask what I shall give thee." Solomon does not ask for riches or for the lives of his enemies, but rather, as our reading puts it, for understanding, so that he may know what is right. And God grants this request. The Hebrew word translated in our reading as "what is right," mishpat, refers not to the divine or religious law specific to the Jews, but rather to the law that binds all men. This becomes apparent in the immediately subsequent verses, not included in our reading, where Solomon famously considers the case of two women, both of whom have recently given birth, although one of the two newborn sons has died, and his mother, in the night, switches his body for the living son of the other mother. By God's grace, the idea occurs to Solomon to order that the child be split in two, which threat reveals the true mother, who is willing to lose her son rather than to see him killed. Solomon gives the child to her. The decision at which Solomon arrives is an application of the law that orders all men, what Thomas Aquinas calls the natural law, but which informs also any particular just system of positive law. This is the law that makes sense of any trial, for instance. It is the duty of a judge in a trial to, for instance, moderate the questioning of prosecution and defense in order to ensure fairness. The questioning by prosecution and defense, in turn, like the probing challenge of Solomon, are also aimed, ideally, at achieving justice. Even this very human activity, however, if properly conducted, depends upon a higher law, God himself, who grants to Solomon at the beginning of his reign a heart which is wise in understanding, as we've heard. Solomon, however, left to his own devices, eventually apostatizes, and so severs this connection between himself and the eternal law. This emphasis upon God's inspiration might, however, worry some jurists and students of the law, for it could be interpreted as requiring that those engaged in the legal profession, and in particular judges, give their allegiance to a spiritual voice within them, rather than to the law, the positive law, they have sworn to uphold. This worry might indeed be augmented by certain words contained in our second reading today. That is the reading from the letter of St. James, that is the 3rd chapter. For there we are told that, and I quote, "The wisdom from above is first of all pure, then peaceful, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits." Do not these words suggest a rejection of the idea that law must be applied as established? Again, it is useful to consider the words actually used by St. James, and especially, but not only, the word translated as gentle, the Greek word epiekes. There's good reason to translate this word as gentle. When Thomas Aquinas discusses this concept as it is used in Aristotle, he says that one who applies the law must not exploit what freedom the established law allows to the detriment of the offender. For, he says, and I quote, "Punishments are not intended by the legislator per se, that is, in themselves, but are intended rather as a sort of medicine for offenders." It is significant, however, that Thomas mentions in this way the intention of the legislator. For the basic idea behind this whole discussion is that legislators, even as they establish laws, realize that were they always present when a law is applied, they would, in certain cases, mitigate its effects. In other words, the gentleness of the law is no blanket permission to override established law, but a recognition that, in certain cases, the implicit mitigating intention of the legislator must be respected. Accordingly, the word our reading translates as gentle might also be translated as equitable. In fact, that's the usual translation. And the corresponding concept would be equity. Equity, says Aristotle, and St. Thomas agrees with him wholeheartedly, is the very essence of the law. That is to say, of the law as established or intended by the legislator. This understanding of law and of justice is consistent with the other words that the letter of James uses to describe the wisdom from above. Besides being gentle or equitable, it is also peaceful, compliant, or obedient, and without inconstancy or insincerity. These are all qualities associated with what has come to be called the rule of law. If a judge, for instance, interprets a law in the way the Spirit, that is his own Spirit, moves him one day, and 2 weeks later interprets it in another way, that is no help in maintaining a peaceful society, in maintaining the rule of law. As our reading says, the fruit of righteousness, or justice, dikaiosune, is sown in peace for those who cultivate peace. We are rational animals. Contradiction in the formulation or the application of laws is no sound basis for peace. We all, according to our natures, desire consistency, logical consistency. Jesus Christ, in our gospel reading, conveys a similar message, that is, a message of respect for the law. The reading begins with words uttered by some of his enemies. "Teacher, we know that you are a truthful man and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth," they say. Jesus will go on to call these men hypocrites, since they are not sincere in so praising him. Their words do, however, accurately describe his character and his way of proceeding, that is, according to the truth. They ask him, "Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not?" They are expecting him to say what will get him into trouble, that no, we ought not to pay the tax since we are under God's law, and God's law eclipses Caesar's law. But he does not say that. He confirms the legitimacy of paying the tax. He confirms the rule of law. He asks for a coin, a Roman coin, a coin of the government that happened to be in power at that time and place. He asks, whose image and inscription is on this coin? Caesar's, they say. Then repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. Christ is not here denying that God's law, divine law, is superior to human law, nor is he denying that there is a connection between human law and the wisdom from above, by means of which human law is made more just. He, the Son of God, is saying rather that God desires the peace, the gentleness, the equity, and the consistency characteristic of the rule of law. Certainly that entails that if a law in a particular polity is unjust, it must be revised or even abandoned, for injustice does not bring peace. But it is also true that the law, the rule of law, enjoys a certain presupposition in its own favor. This truth is contained in those red tongues of fire come from above.